Hello, I'm so glad you're here today because I have something that you've got to try using the supplies you have. Hi there, this is Jennifer McGuire, and today I am showing you another variation of the 4-for-1 technique where you create 4 pieces at once. We're focusing on backgrounds today, and the best part about this, not only do you get 4-for-1 backgrounds, is that you can use a variety of supplies together, different types of supplies, and really have some fun. I was having a really challenging day the other day. It was rough. We all have those. And I started to create these backgrounds, and I'm telling you, it lifted me so much. And I think you might like it too, and I hope you give it a try. So I'm going to start by creating many backgrounds, and then we're going to turn them into cards. I have lots of ideas for you. The way these backgrounds come together feels kind of like magic, and you end up with lots of shimmer, shine, texture, and bold color. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll be using Tim Holtz Distress Heavy Stock today, but you could use whatever cardstock you have. The reason I chose to use this is a super smooth, very heavyweight white cardstock. However, it handles a lot that you throw on it. So it'll handle water nicely, you can alter it in many ways, and it'll stand up to it. It's 130 pounds, super thick, die cuts beautifully. I really like this cardstock. And by the way, you can blend ink on it wonderfully. But use whatever cardstock you have. If you're looking for a cardstock that can handle lots of layers and so on, this is a good option. I have cut these pieces to 6.5 by 8.5 inches. You could do whatever size you want, but you'll see why I chose that particular size later in this video. From this one piece, I'll be able to create 4 different background pieces with this technique. Now, the ink that I'm using today is Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated Dye ink. Now, I will be using the full-size pads today, but I wanted to let you know the ink cubes are available in many colors now. I know a lot of people like the cubes, so that option would work well. Now, for this first step, you could use any inks that you want. It really doesn't matter. I'm using these inks because they go on like butter, and the colors are just wonderful. These 4-for-1 backgrounds I'm making today, I want to have bold color. So I am starting with the heavy stock paper, and then I'm adding bold color on top. You could apply the bold color however you want. You could do ink blending. You could go direct to paper. You can do anything you want here. You could use sprays to cover it, whatever you want. I decided to use a Tim Holtz Brayer. The reason I chose that is I really love the results, this kind of artsy look that you get. You'll see the results in a moment. And it's really easy to do. And I've been having shoulder problems lately. Ink blending these backgrounds would have been rough on me. I would have had to call support from Lila. So I'm using the Brayer. I really feel like the Brayer is a really good tool to have in your craft room. I've done a whole video on ways to use Brayers and techniques you can do, and I will link to that up here on the top right and in my description below. But what I'm doing here is just putting ink down with the Brayer, not trying to make it look perfect by any means, and just overlap here and there. And I try to spread the blocks of color around and make sure that they overlap. So we're just building up color on this white cardstock. Notice I make sure to get a little bit of each color kind of in each area of these backgrounds because we will cut this background down into smaller pieces. So you don't want just one color on one side and another color on another side unless, you're looking for 4 panels that are really different. Totally up to you, but you just want to put color down onto that heavy stock in any way that you want. I really like this look. I had mentioned that the day that I made these backgrounds, I was really having a rough day. I know that you can all relate to it, and you just need a little bit of time to escape and a little bit of happiness, and that's what I'm doing here. And today's technique is perfect for it because you can let go of everything. You can play with color, play with lots of your supplies. We're going to use a lot of different things together and just have fun. So if you're having one of those days, come back to this video because this technique could really help you out. Afterwards, I felt so much better. Okay, so I have a few backgrounds here. I end up doing a 4th one that I don't love. You'll see it later, but I still use it and it works great. Now that we have that base color down, I am going to add some shimmer. I love shimmer, and I'm telling you that one of my absolute favorite products in the craft room is the Tim Holtz Distress Mica Stain Spray. These are fantastic. A little goes a long way. You don't need much of this, and you'll get more shimmer than you can from most other products. I am so excited because Tim has released more colors recently, and I'm using some of the newer colors today so you can see them in action. If you've never tried these, this is a great thing to put on your wish list because they are fantastic. You can paint with them, spray with them, blend with them, whatever you want. Definitely the fastest way to use them is to just do a quick spritz. Now, if you do a quick full press of the nozzle, you get a full spray, but you can do like a partial and get kind of a bigger droplets. You can see how each spray looks a little different because I'm kind of playing around with it. Also, you can add water to it then, just like 1 or 2 sprays of this, then add water to that, and it gets it moving and kind of spreads that shimmer around. Now, what's different about this than some other products is the shimmer in here is colored. The actual shimmer's colored, not just the liquid. So you get this beautiful, colorful shimmer when you're done. Now, here I'm overthinking it. Don't do this. Don't overthink like me. Just let it go, unless that's part of who you are, like I am. But if I get too dark of spots, I will just pick up some of the excess with the cloth. But really, if you let it be, it'll dry beautifully. So I'm going to set these aside to dry. You can see I put a little spray in different areas just to make sure that there is shimmer on, all parts of the background. So here I'm putting more of a full spray down. You can see I slowly press down so I got some bigger droplets and some of a bit of a mist. This time I'm not adding water. I'm going to leave it as is. I did decide to add onto there some frozen fog. The frozen fog color is fantastic because it's silvery looking, and it can also kind of soften any darker colors you have behind it. You could also just spray this completely over a background and get lots of shimmer. And as I mentioned, you can paint with it and more. I will continue to use Distress Mica stain sprays in future videos. I've done some in the past, and I'll link to a video up here in the top right if you're looking for more ideas. Now, this one ends up being the most beautiful. I love this one in the end, but it will look messy at first. That's part of the process of what we're doing today. If at any point you're doing today's technique and you're feeling like you're not liking what you're doing, stay with it. It'll all be good in the end. By the way, there I kind of forced the nozzle to do drops so that I would have some big spots of shimmer when it dries. Okay, so now let's let those dry for a while, and now I'm back. You can see these beautiful backgrounds. Just gorgeous. This one I used a lot of water, so the shimmer moved around a lot, but the others I used less water, so you have more concentrated areas of that shimmery spray look. Now this is where I'm going to talk about why I chose the 6.5 by 8.5 inch size. The reason I chose that size is because that's the size of the inside of my MISTI stamping tool. And it's also the size of that stamp and stencil mat that you see behind the paper here. It is 6.5 by 8.5. And that is a sticky mat that's really going to help us out today. However, if you don't have a sticky mat, you could definitely use temporary tape on the back of your pieces. I've done this kind of technique in the past before. I'll link to it up on the top right. And you can see how to do this technique with tape, but I'm using the sticky mat and you'll see it's very helpful. By the way, look at that shimmer there. Outstanding. I just love the shimmer, especially on this red one. If you wanted to, you could stop here. You can skip the additional layers that we're going to add and use these backgrounds. However, I encourage you to try the next step that we're about to do. If you are ever stuck creatively, this technique could also be good to get you going again. The reason is we're going to use a bunch of supplies, things that I've wanted to use. And I think one of the best ways to feel better creatively is to use the products you have invested in, right? Put your products to good use, even if it's just for this technique we're doing today, and it'll help your creativity a lot. By the way, this is the 4th background I did off screen. I didn't think I'd like it at this point, but just wait, it'll turn out great in the end. So stick with it if you're not thrilled at this point. Okay, so I have some other tools here. This is that Stamp and Stencil mat from Simon Says Stamp and Brutus Monroe. Then I also have my MISTI stamping tool. And in the MISTI stamping tool, I have my Waffle flower grip mat. These are all tools that help with this technique, but you definitely don't need them. And remember, this is 8.5 by 6.5. That way, the background will fit into those tools. But first, I'm going to cut my backgrounds down, and you'll see why in a moment. For this first background, I'm cutting it into 4 equal size rectangles. So I put the cutting lines up there at the top. This ends up with 4 pieces that are 3¼ by 4¼ Great for a backdrop on your card. Now for some of the others, I'm going to show some other ways you can cut them up into smaller pieces for multiple cards. For this one, I'm cutting at 5.5 inches, and this will give me a long strip I can use on a card. And then the rest of it I'll cut at 3 inches and then again at 3 inches. And this will give me 3 pieces that'll fit nicely like down the center of a card. It'll be as tall as a card and just fit right down the center. Then this one here, I'm cutting at 3¼ so that's cutting it in half. Then I'm going to cut at 5.5. This will give me 2 long panels for a card and then 2 smaller kind of square pieces that I can also use. Remember, you could even die cut some of these pieces. Now this one here, I'm going to keep it bigger. I'm going to just cut this right in half the other direction at 4¼ So this one's going to give us only 2 panels, but it's worth it. All right, so let's get going with the technique. This is where the fun comes in. I'm going to take those 4 pieces I just cut up and stick them back together onto my sticky mat. If you don't have a sticky mat, just put temporary tape on the back to tape them together. So it's like you're working with a solid piece again. You'll see why I cut it up in a moment, but at this point, I think it's helpful to have it already cut up. Now we can do to these pieces of cardstock whatever we want, and instead of working on them as 4 individual backgrounds, we can do them all at once, saving a lot of time. So I went through my Simon Says Stamp newest release. This is the Stamptember release. I just did a complete video on all of these products. I will link to it up here on the top right and in my description below. But I just grabbed a bunch of different types of products that I really wanted to use. This is your chance to go through your stash, grab some products you've wanted to use or haven't used in a while, and put them to use. Get them inky. So I have stamps, background dies, stencils, and more. Let's start with a background stamp. This is the new Simon Says Stamp Intersecting Lines background stamp. I love this one. It's fantastic, and you'll see it is great for today's technique or any background. I'm inking up that background stamp with an ink that matches the background that we did. This is the Galaxy color. It's just a darker color than what I used on the background. I'm inking up my stamp and using a dry cloth to wipe away some of the ink around the edges so that when I stamp this, I have kind of this floating area of that image with soft edges instead of harsh edges. This is one of the techniques that works best for what we're doing today, to kind of wipe away the edges of the ink so it's not a harsh stamping. And by the way, I made sure to stamp right there in the center, and that way it hits all 4 of those cut pieces. Okay, next I thought I'd use a clear stamp. So this is the Simon Says Stamp Checking In 6x8 stamp set. Lots of great sentiments on here. And the best part is the coordinating die set that's available cuts out all of those sentiments. I will be using these sentiments later in this video, so you can get a look at them now. But right now I'm using the floral border. Now in there you can see all 4 of my pieces are stuck together, right? So I just have this one big panel to work with, but really it's 4 backgrounds. And that is a huge time saver. So now I can line up this floral border, make sure it hits more than one of those panels. You can see it crosses over onto 2. And that way I'm really filling up each of these panels all at once very quickly. I will ink this up and stamp with another color that is just slightly darker than my background. But listen, this is mixed media where you're layering lots of things together. Do whatever you like, what works for you. I want these to be bold, kind of monochromatic-like backgrounds. But for me, when I'm doing layering like this, I like to use inks that are darker than my background, and later we'll use inks that are lighter. So there will be 3 types of inks I use. This is the first. And color that is darker than your background. All right, next I have my Waffle Flower grip mat. This is just helpful because it holds things in place as you ink. And what's great is to take your sticky mat and put that onto the grip mat, and it really holds well there. So all of my backgrounds are still on that stamp and stencil mat, that sticky mat, holding them close together so we can treat it as one big background. Now you can see the grip mat there is behind it, that clear mat. It's going to hold my papers and the stencil in place as we do some stenciling. Now this arched line stencil is a great one for the technique we're doing today because it brings in that kind of curved line, and so it just adds another element. So I have some blank stencil material that I've cut down into strips there that's just used as a mask so I don't get my ink everywhere. You could use scrap cardstock for that. This is the second type of ink that I like to use when doing layering like this. White pigment ink. It will make your background pop. So I use white pigment ink along with a blending brush, but instead of going in swirly motions, I tap over the stencil. So you'll see me do it again here. The reason I tap is because this is a sticky ink and it'll want to try to make that stencil move. Also, you get more ink down if you tap. And finally, I don't want to pick up any of that purple ink from behind and put it onto my brush or ink pad, so tapping is the best way. Time for some more white ink over stencils. This time I have the Floral Borders stencil. This is great for the technique we're doing. I want to make sure to get some white stenciling on the other two panels. So what I've done here is I've taken one of those borders and I have it stretched diagonally. So it's actually hitting 3 of those 4 panels on the background. Look how quick it is to add that white pigment ink on top and how striking the results are. So this really doesn't take that long to just pile all of these different products on our backgrounds. Definitely worth it, and we'll have 4 panels in the end. Next up, I'm bringing in another stencil. This is the pattern circle stencil. Circles are great to add to these elements because we want some of those curved lines. It just adds some interest. And now it's time for our third type of ink I like to use for these mixed media backgrounds, and that is a metallic ink. This is Honeybee's Silver Metallic. Later I'll be using the gold. Again, I have a blending brush designated just for this ink, and I tap it over the stencil. By tapping, it's going to be much more intense silver shine. If you want to, you can do heat embossing, but so far I'm just sticking with inks. Next, I have a background die. Yes, you can use your dies on this. This is the Fanfare background plate. I love this one. There's actually a smaller die that coordinates with it. What I did is I cut it from a scrap cardstock, and I'm using it as a stencil. And I'm just inking over certain areas by tapping with a blending brush a darker color. So I'm going back to the idea of adding darker color on the background. And just adding these little leaves here and there on the background, making sure that I'm hitting the different areas. Making sure that I'm doing some overlapping. So you can see I'm overlapping a little bit. I promise you, don't overthink this. Don't try to think, oh, I want to make sure that this panel here has something in all parts, or this panel does. When you just keep adding lots on, it'll all work out in the end. So far we have used a cling stamp, clear stamp, stencils, and a die. How about we try using some layering stencils? Now, layering stencils I'm a big fan of. This one's a great one, the Floral Whimsy layering stencils. And you can create that background you see on the right. But keep in mind, oftentimes layering stencils have stencils that can be used individually. You don't have to use them all together. For example, here I'm using just the leaf layering stencil from that set so that I can put some dark blue leaves in different areas on this background. So if you do invest in a layering stencil set, I encourage you to look closer at them and see if you can use some of those stencils individually. In fact, this layering stencil set has a stencil that just does dots, which would be great for a snow background or to add dots on this background. I'm not using it today, but something to look for in your layering stencil sets. So far we have added lots of ink, stamping, stenciling, some shimmer. Let's add a little bit of texture. You could skip this step if you want to, but it's really fast, and I feel like it's something that works on any background. I will be using the new Simon Says Stamp balloon pattern stencils. These are actually meant to be stenciled onto a balloon to kind of give that dimensional perspective, but I'm using them just as little spots of texture on my background. I'm also using the Tim Holtz Distress Snowfall Grit Paste. I really like this stuff because it is clear, adds a little bit of sparkle, just a little bit, but adds a lot of texture. And because it's clear, you can use it on anything. You know, instead of having a million different colors, you can use this on anything. And all I'm doing is just adding spots of this over a stencil. Now, I'm not making sure to make it smooth or even. It's just about putting it down. Now, it looks a little white here, but it does dry a little more transparent. So I'm doing spots of these stencils in different areas on the background, making sure that I'm really just kind of spreading this out. You may notice I do a lot of things in threes on these backgrounds, like one in the top center, one on the side, and one towards the bottom of the other side. That way I can make sure everything's kind of spread out, and when this is done, I can take the 4 backgrounds apart, and there'll be a little bit of something everywhere. Now, if you wanted to add color to this grit paste, you can put a little Reinker in it on your glass work surface and mix it up, but I really like to use it as is. So I'm going to set these aside to dry, but I'm going to carefully take them off of my sticky mat first because I need the sticky mat for the next backgrounds. But you can see how we end up with 4 individual backgrounds that are all a little different, but I did them all together, which was a huge time saver. And look at how much interest each one has. Now, after giving that some time to dry, here's a closer look at that grit paste and the shimmer and the stamping and the stenciling. Just fun and beautiful and such a unique look that I was able to do very quickly. And I'm feeling so good right now because I'm using products, getting my hands inky, and just kind of letting go. All right, let's move on to the reddish color backgrounds. I'm just piecing these back together. It doesn't matter how you put them together. I'm just putting them back onto the sticky mat so I can work with the one panel instead of individuals. Okay, let's start with that background stamping technique. This is the wonky trapezoid. I am inking that up with a dark pink color and then softening the edges of that inking with a dry cloth, just wiping some of that ink away, and stamping that towards the center so it kind of hits all of those pieces. Now I'm back to that checking in floral border stamp, and I'll stamp this on one side, and you can see it's hitting that bottom piece and the long strip on the side. Once I've stamped this, I can rotate that whole background and hit the other side also. Now, if you find that maybe one of the pieces on the edge or in the middle isn't getting enough love, you can switch spots. You can peel off one of the piece or 2 of the pieces, swap their positions, and continue. So that's another advantage. You can move pieces around on that sticky mat. Again, if you don't have a sticky mat, you can just temporarily tape the pieces together on the back. Next, I'm going to add some sentiments to my background. Yes, you can use sentiments that go along with the theme of the cards you're making and use them as background elements. They can be sideways, upside down, diagonal, whatever you want. But it's just about adding more images, just more things to look at. Now, last time with the background stamp, I used a darker ink color. Remember, I used darker ink colors, white or metallics. Here I'm skipping to metallics and doing a gold metallic ink for these. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but when you tilt it in the light, you definitely see that shine. So these sentiments aren't my focal point sentiments. These are just backdrops. Have you ever noticed that when you get a stamp set, there's always a lot of sentiments in the set, and some of them never get any love? This is a great way to use some of those. And by the way, I stamped on one side, rotated that whole panel, and stamp on the other side. All right, next let's do some stenciling. I really like this lined arches stencil. It's a great element to add on backgrounds. This time I'm using it with that same gold ink. Again, I encourage you to get a blending tool, any kind of inking tool, and designate it for the silver, the gold, or the white, and that way you don't have to worry about cross-contaminating. If you don't have a blending tool, you could also do this with your finger. You can apply white pigment ink or metallic inks with your finger. Okay, so there we got some gold stenciling down. Now let's grab the white, and I'm doing white again with these balloon pattern stencils. Aren't these stencils cool? I think they're just so fun and different. Again, dabbing the ink over the stencils instead of swirling. When I use colored inks, like colored dye inks, I go in a swirling motion, but here we want to do that dabbing motion. Okay, so these I'm done with. I'm not going to add any texture to these. I'm really adding quite a lot less on these, but I wanted a lot of that shimmer to show through. All right, now remember there was the one panel I just cut in half, so this will only give me 2 backgrounds, but I can do 2 complete card panel backgrounds with this. I always like to start with stamping a cling stamp where we do the inking and soften the edges. I just feel like that's a great way to get going. Now here I wanted some love on the other side of these panels, so I'm swapping positions. So now I can do some stamping there at the center easier. It really doesn't matter. You can put these together however you want on that sticky mat. It's just so helpful to be able to work with it as one piece instead of many individual. It's a huge time saver. I'm using a lot of the same inks and products on all of these backgrounds. You can see me doing them here. I like this particular background because notice there are some softer kind of mint color areas and some darker blue areas. I learned from doing these, I like that variation, and I will know to do that more in the future. Now at this point I have my 2 bigger backgrounds, and I noticed there were some spots where I wanted a little something extra. So after taking them apart, you can still add more to it if you want to. You can do ink blending around the edges to give more definition, totally up to you. All right, this is the last set. I'm going to go through this one quickly and only show you the parts that are different than the other backgrounds. Here I'm using the one floral stencil from that Whimsy floral layering stencil set to put a big purple flower here and there on this background. So again, I'm using just one of the stencils in a layering stencil set, giving me more use of these products, stretching my supplies, and building my creativity. So I did a bunch of inking, stenciling, stamping on that background. Now I'm back to that grid paste. So I'm doing some grid paste, making sure I cross over the different panel edges. And to make this one even more sparkly, I'm sprinkling some rock candy distress glitter onto that wet grit paste. And then I'll leave it alone to dry. And when it dries, now we have more sparkle to this. Now, rock candy glitter is like the glitter that's perfect for anyone, even those who don't like glitter, because it looks like glistening sugar. It's not like shiny metallic glitter. It is just this glistening snow or sugar-like look that works on any project. Look at that. I just think that's beautiful. This is what it looks like after it dries. And I really like that texture and bit of sparkle that it adds. All right, now let's make some cards. All of these have dried, and we can work with these however we want. We can use them as background elements, or we can die cut from them, and I'm going to show both today. So let's start with these panels here. I did trim them down to be 4 by 5¼ inches. So we have 2 note card backgrounds. Now there are strips that I cut off. I'm going to save those because I can use those on a card also. I will link to a video showing how to use little inky stamp strips like this to create more cards. I'll link to that up here on the top right and in my description below. At this point, if you want to add a little more color or depth around the edges, you can definitely do so. What's cool is when you put this dye ink over that dried white pigment ink, it kind of resists it, just allowing it to pop out even more. One last thing that I like to do to these backgrounds once I'm done is to add a little speckle of white. So I have Simon Says Stamp White Pigment Ink Reinker, and I put a drop or 2 onto my glass work surface and add a little bit of water to it. And then you can flick it on using a brush. There are so many different white products that you can use for this look, but using a reinker is great because then it has another purpose. Of course, this reinker can re-ink my ink pad, but here it works great for the speckled look. And it dries very quickly and it stays bright white. If you want it to have a little shimmer, you could even put in a little bit of pigment powder like Perfect Pearls, and that will give you white shimmery speckles. If you want brighter white speckles, use less water. If you want softer white speckles, use more water. And look at that shimmer and all the layers of inking we've done. Let's go back to that pool colored background now that our little speckles are dry and finish it off. When I want to add one of these backgrounds to a card, one of my favorite ways to add it is with double-sided adhesive. If you have a warped piece because you've used water or lots of product, this is a great way to flatten it out so that your final card is nice and flat. By putting double-sided adhesive on the back and then placing it onto your note card, it'll be nice and smooth in the end. So this is trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm adding it to a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And here you can see the warping is completely gone thanks to the double-sided tape. Now onto this card, I'm adding some die cuts using the Simon Says Stamp Holly Sprigs die set. You can see what it looks like there with colors, but I'm using white and silver for this particular card. Now to save time in this really long video, I'm going to do some of the assembly off screen. So off screen, I die cut the white sprigs, and I did 3 sprigs glued together for dimension. And then I did the berries with silver glitter cardstock. Very simple, and I glued it there up on the top left corner. Now for a sentiment, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp CZ Designs Holiday Typewriter. And I did All Is Calm, All Is Bright with dark blue ink, and I used the coordinating die to cut it out and add it on top of the sprig. You could stop here, but I thought I would use some of these additional sentiments from the same set to stamp in the background. It really matches in nicely, builds the theme up a little more. Now these I just kind of do, at an angle or sideways, just so they're kind of part of the background and not a focal point sentiment. And again, I'm using darker ink colors, metallic or white. And I like to do kind of a triangle of the sentiment. So you can see I have some on the bottom left, some over there on the right, and then we'll do one towards the top. And this just kind of fills in some of that space, builds the theme, and adds interest. So I have a lot of layers and a lot of images, a lot of products used here, but you could always do much less. But if you're like me and have built up a stash of products, might as well use as many as possible to give them all more life. So here's a look at the completed card. Look at all of those layers in the background. You have the shimmer from the Mica spray, the bold white from the pigment ink, the layering of inks, that little speckle, then the die cuts on top, all pulling together for a really nice, unique holiday card. But I could have used that background for any theme card. That's another great thing about this technique. It's time for another example. For this one, I have a bold background going right down the center, but I wanted to add some interest to the white edges showing through, just for more texture on this card. And this I thought I'd show you because it's using an embossing folder on just the front of a note card. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. I'm going to open it up and spray the front of the card on both sides a little bit with water, just mist water on both sides. Then slide the front panel of the card into your embossing folder and leave the rest of it hanging out. Then run it through your die cut machine, and that will give you the embossing texture on the front only. By the way, this is the Tumble Leaf 3D embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. I love this one. It's such a great design. And look at this. Now we have texture on that note card, and it didn't take long to do at all. I want to glue one of my inky panels onto this texture. And because I'm gluing onto texture, we got to make sure we use enough glue. You could use double-sided tape here or double-sided adhesive sheet, or use a strong liquid adhesive and make sure you spread it out a lot. You don't want a lot in one spot, but you want to spread it out so that it grabs onto that texture of the note card. Once I have that in place, I will put something heavy on it so it has time to dry and connect. All right, now for the die cuts to add to this. I did assemble my die cuts off screen, but let me show you the die set. This is the Simon Says Stamp Spindle Flower die set. Here it is in purple just so you can see it better. I really like these because they're kind of fun layering. You could do different colors for the different layers, but I did all of my die cuts today in white cardstock. For a sentiment, I chose the Thankful die cut along with the shadow die, and that's from the Giving Thanks die set, which also includes Grateful. And there is a hot foil plate set available separately that coordinates if you're interested. All right, now I have my layered white die cuts here using the Spindle Flower dies, and I'm just gluing those onto our background. And then I will add our sentiment die cut on top of that. The sentiment die cut is white for the shadow and gold glitter cardstock for the word. I did stack a few die cuts so it would be strong, and I used foam squares on the left and the right so I could lay it on top of the stems of our flowers. I also created a third flower, cut off just one of the petals, and I'm using that petal upside down as a leaf. So I kind of made my own leaf by altering the die cut. And then finally, I finish it off by adding some gold glitter gemstones in the background. Now check this out. You can see that shimmer from the Mica stain spray in the background. See it up there? It's like nothing else. I think it's just absolutely beautiful and so easy to use. And we have all the other interests from the stamping, the white pigment ink, the metallic inks, the stenciling, and more. And then we just have the bold die cuts and sentiment on top. Now you may have noticed that when I have bold backgrounds, I often like to use white die cuts on top, just so they stand out and you have that nice contrast. But you can use colored die cuts. Now in this case, I wanted darker die cuts so you could see them better. And I couldn't find the right color of dark cardstock, so I made my own. So here I have a piece of like this plum color cardstock, but it's a bit too light. So I am taking a taffy dye ink pad and pressing it onto it. That way I know it'll match the rest of my project nicely, and it will be nice and dark. So I'm just pressing that ink pad on there much faster than using a brush or blending tool, and then I can die cut from that paper. So here I will use the Cosmic Layered Butterfly die. You can see that die there. I use that for a few of my cards today. I'm a big fan of butterflies. I feel like they work for a lot of occasions, and this is a good simple layering set. I also have the wings of the butterfly there that I want to make a bit darker, but I'm only putting the darker ink towards the center of the die cuts. And I'm using my Waffle flower grip mat to hold those die cuts in place so it doesn't shift as I ink onto it. So again, just that darker color towards the center, not spending much time at all on that. Then we can glue those layers together and we have a dark butterfly that'll stand out against our lighter pieces of inked backgrounds that we created. After I assemble the butterfly, I'll set it aside to dry, and next I'm using the Fanfare frame die. I used this earlier as a stencil. Here I die cut two of the backgrounds from white cardstock and glued it to a white note card. I love that background look. And then I'll do a second card at the same time, this time using the Bountiful Blooms embossing folder. This folder actually comes with dies, so you can do textured flowers, but I just used it for a background. So next I have this piece here that I cut earlier and created. I'm going to cut it right down the center so I have two narrow panels. So I'm actually getting more than 4 cards from this set of purple backgrounds I created. It just means cutting the pieces smaller, but in this case, I think it works really well. Now I wanted to add a little more to this, a little more pop of dark color. So I'm just digging through my stamps, finding something that has small images, those small little stamps that often go ignored or overlooked. And I'm stamping a few of those onto my background. So you can add more to these pieces after you've taken them apart off of the sticky mat, and add as much or as little as you want. You may notice that again, I'm doing like 3 areas that kind of form a triangle. I always feel that helps visually on your card. All right, so now I want to mat this little piece. So there's a little bit of brushed silver cardstock showing on the left and the right. So I'm putting glue on the back of it, adding it to a scrap of that brushed silver cardstock, and then trimming it down. You'll notice there I used the layered cosmic butterfly die set to create a white and silver butterfly for this card. So I'll have one card with the dark butterfly and one with the light. I need to add this strip down the center of my card, and I want to make sure it's centered and straight. And I always struggle with that. Here's a little trick I do. I use the Simon Says Stamp A2 placement guide. I can lay this over my card, and using the grid lines, I can make sure that it's centered on the background and that it's straight. I'm notorious for putting these crooked, and that's the fastest way to make sure it's both centered and straight. All right, so for this one, I glued the butterfly on top, and then I used that check-in stamp set that I showed you earlier for the sentiment and then the coordinating die to cut it out. Here's a closer look at that shimmer, that grit paste with the rock candy glitter on it, and the additional stamping that we added. And because we made our cardstock butterfly darker, it stands out nicely. Now for the other card that's similar with the white butterfly, I used the Simon Says Stamp CZ Design Seasons Greeting Stamp Set. I mentioned in my last video, I think this is a must-have set. It has every occasion you can imagine on here and some unique ones. I really, really like this set. So I stamped Sending So Much Love with a dark purple ink on a white cardstock strip scrap that I had and added that onto the butterfly. You can see the embossing folder background and then all the texture, shimmer, and shine that we added to that little strip down the center. So you can always cut these backgrounds that you make down even smaller to get more cards from them. And we'll do some die cutting from some of the scraps later on. Now here is another card that I made off screen, also using the same sentiment stamp set and butterfly, but this is one of our rectangle panels from the beginning of the video. I matted it with brushed silver cardstock and added it onto a note card. And look at all that texture and shimmer and shine and images all used together to create that focal point background. I'm a big fan of these butterflies, but really you could use any element up there for any themed card. All right, now let's do something completely different. Let's use one of these backgrounds for a Halloween background. I don't make a lot of Halloween cards, but I am so crazy about this particular product that I wanted to put it to use. This embossing folder comes with the dies and they work really well together or separately. I use the house die and cut from white cardstock, and then I put it into the embossing folder, lining it up with the pattern, and I'll run it through my die cut machine. I'm blown away by the detail that this folder adds to this die cut. Look at that. It's just, I think it's beautiful. You could color it if you wanted to, but it looks great just as is. And the white die cut will look great against that bold background. Because I want the contrast and I want this to look a little more spooky, I'm adding a bit more dark ink around the edges and just kind of random here and there. I am covering up some of the inking we've done, but it still all shows through nicely. All right, next I wanted to add some stamped sentiments to the background, again, to pull in that theme. So this will make the background look more Halloween-like because of the Halloween greetings. So I chose a few from this Trick or Treat stamp set, and I'll just stamp that with a darker ink. Again, these aren't the main sentiments, just to give that theme feeling to the background. And because I'm stamping on top of some shimmer and shine, I like to heat set that ink. Now I finished the rest of this card off screen. It was very simple. I trimmed the background down and I made a note card that fit better. So this note card is 5.5 by 3.25 inches. You can see I added some little ghosts from that same die set, a happy Halloween sentiment from the Season's Greetings stamp set I used on my last card. And look at that. Look at all that shine, that texture. Really, this background worked for a Halloween card, but on the other cards, they were more spring or summer. And earlier, I even used one for a Christmas card. So really, you can use these backgrounds for all occasions. And once you've made the backgrounds, it doesn't take long to add the rest to it to make a completed card. All right, let's do some more butterflies, but using a different product. This is the 3D embossing folder and die set. They come together. It's the gliding butterflies. I mentioned in my last video, this is a favorite of mine. You'll see me use it a lot. I die cut the butterfly from gold metallic cardstock, put it in the embossing folder, and look at this. It looks like a metal embellishment, but I just did that using the set and gold cardstock. Now on the background of this card, I used an older detail petal plate from Simon. This just does a piercing pattern. I used that on the front of my white note card. I added one of our inky panels. You can see all that shimmer there. Then I added the gold butterfly with some gold gemstones, and then the I'm Here sentiment from the Checking on You stamp set. So this one was really quick to pull together once I had those background elements done. Now this design was my favorite. I think I liked that panel down the right-hand side, so I plan to do more like this one. Now I have some background panels left over and I could continue to make cards, but I wanted to show you that you can also use these backgrounds and die cut from them. And it really adds a lot of interest to your die cuts. This is also great to do with any scraps you may create. So this is the Simon Says Stamp Artwork Grid Plate die. I think this is a great die because it's a great way to use up your scraps. Now, remember that some of my panels have texture. I found you could still die cut it. Here I'm cutting pieces from that texture, but I tried it out afterwards and you can die cut even with that texture with no problem. So I ended up using that background die and cutting from lots of the panel pieces and scraps I have left. And this will create a bunch of little squares. Back in the day, a lot of card makers and stampers would create what they called inchies, which were little textured, stampy squares that you could add to projects. That's really what we're doing here, creating a lot of these little cubes that we can mix and match. So off screen, I die cut 3 of these grid from white cardstock and glued them together for stacked look, and I'm gluing that onto a card. Then I can start filling in the squares with all of these different inky pieces. Now I want to do 2 cards with these squares, so I've got them here and I'm kind of laying them all out. I don't have many of that red color left, so I'm making sure I do kind of a visual triangle of the red to start with, and then fill in with the pool colored squares and purple squares. Then I'll do a second card with purple squares because I have a lot of those left over. After I have them planned out, I can go back and put glue behind each and push them into place. And here we have this fun kind of window looking card. And you can see all of the different texture and inking and stamping on each of those squares. I just added a simple butterfly with a simple sentiment. And I feel like this card has so much interest thanks to that background technique we did earlier. It's really quite magical, all the different things you can get from it. And then I do have this one left over. Now I have not added anything to this yet. Next time I need a card for a particular occasion, I will think about the person and what is best to add to it. Maybe a birthday cake or a balloon for a birthday card, or you could do a floral for a thinking of you card, whatever you want. But I have this background ready using all those little scraps that I had left over or that you just die cut from some of your inky panels. Now I have another card. This is our last one, and this one uses smaller die cut shapes. So I had some scraps left over, these strips from our backgrounds that I cut off, some leftover squares. I'm using the Billow butterflies from Simon Says Stamp and die cutting butterfly wings from these. This is a great way to use even your smallest inky background scraps. Never throw those away. Now I could use these butterflies on multiple cards, but I thought it'd be fun to do a background covered in these butterflies, using them all together. So here you can see I have a sentiment that I've got there in the bottom, a placeholder for that sentiment, and around it I'm gluing butterflies. I just start around the sentiment and work my way out. I used gold cardstock for the body of the butterflies, and I'm just gluing them in to fill all of the spaces. You can see again that the sending hugs from the checking and stamp set, the die cut is glued there. I just haven't stamped it on there yet. I am using liquid glue, so I'm able to move things around until I'm happy. I also glued some gold pearls in some of the open spaces. Once it's dry, I can trim off the excess and add my sending hug sentiment. So here I was able to use a lot of scraps together on one card. By the way, on the background of that card, that white, I used a pinpoint piercing background die just to add a little bit of interest. I'm a big fan of background dies like that do the piercing, and it's great to just add a little more texture to all the texture that we have on those butterflies. All right, so there's my long video for today showing you how magical it can be to create several backgrounds at once. Most of the time it was 4 for 1, sometimes it was more, sometimes it was 2 for 1. But I'm able to use a lot of my different products, putting them to good use and building my creativity and also trying new things. I really hope you'll try this out with the supplies you have. If you want to see what I used, I have it linked below in my YouTube description, and I appreciate you watching. If you want a closer look at some of the products I used today, I have a close-up video on this new Simon Says Stamp Stamptember release. It's here in the middle, and another video with another 4 for 1 technique worth checking out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.